into my briefing. And next slide. So I'm going to talk a little bit about cool season crops, what that means, because it's it's broader than root crops, and some key dates to keep in mind in relation to what cool season is, and getting things started in the garden in the spring season, and a little bit about the fall, talking about cool season. Then I'll talk about root crops, give a little more detail on what that means, and provide some resources. As mentioned, Leslie and Kathy will talk about beets and carrots. I'll mention here that there's a session tomorrow, which many of you may have seen in the calendar when you signed up, another all about veggies on radishes and potatoes, which are also in the grouping of root crops. And at the end, we'll talk about other events that are coming up, virtual plant clinics and the All About Veggies series. Okay, with that, I'll talk about cool season crops. Broadly speaking, cool season means that the plant can handle cool temperatures, but not just that they can start to grow. They need the cool temperatures to ensure germination, growth, fruit set, and maturity. Within that category of cool season, again, just broadly speaking now, you have hardy to semi-hardy, and that has to do with how well the plant, the vegetable, the root vegetable, or leaf vegetable can handle frost. So you've got a range within cool season. Most root crops and leafy veggies are considered cool season crops. These are often the first and the last to plant in the garden year, and the first being putting out seed before the average last frost date, and then in the fall, early enough before the first average frost date in the late fall, so that it can get started and mature during the cooler temperatures. The life cycles of cool season crops can be, quick growers, weeks to months. So you get them in early. I think turnips might be an example of one that grows fairly quickly that I've got a little bit of experience with. So you can get, fairly short periods, a few weeks, depending on the size of the turnip too, or whether or not you're just looking for the leaves, to months. One note about cool season, they may continue to grow as the temperatures warm up. I think vegetables can be a typical example, but as they experience warmer temperatures, they might keep growing and look good, but the warm temperatures may cause the leaves to toughen up a bit, and plants, particularly leafy greens, may lose their sweetness. So there's a boundary there where some do better than other. Like carrots, you can keep growing a little bit longer than some of the other crops. On the right, I've given a list of examples. That the first three, beets, carrots, and turnips, are, real root vegetables. Kale and lettuce, of course, are leafy greens that are considered cool season. Cabbage and things in that same family, Brassica, Brussels sprouts, broccoli, and so forth, are considered cool season. Again, some will continue in the warmer temperatures better than others. And I included cilantro just as another example of, something that can be planted in cooler temperatures in the spring or the fall and do well until it gets hot, and then they'll go to seed. And parsley, which is a biennial plant. Just a quick mention on warm season crops. That's not the topic today, but when we say warm season, those are plants that you don't put out before the average frost date. In fact, usually it's some period after that date. Many of the warm season crops, you start from seed indoors or buy a plant to transplant out after the average last frost date. Others, like there's some squashes you might start inside to get them going before you put out, but generally, particularly tomatoes, peppers, and eggplant, you need to start inside to get them going, and that start date is already with us, so that they thrive and they can mature fully in the garden. Another quick note about cool season versus warm season is cool season you can do multiple crops or succession seeding, whereas with warm season typically you'll only have one harvest. There are exceptions like with beans where you can do repeated seedings. And I haven't done this myself, but you can also start some herbs that are hot or warmer season. Okay, next slide, please. So key dates, what do I mean by that when we talk about cool season crops? I took a couple pictures of a seed pack. This happens to be a leafy green, leafy type cool season crop, chard. And I point out this is a very informative seed packet. They're not all like this, but usually a good quality seed packet will give you the information you need to pay attention to make sure you know what you're buying and you get it started when you need to start. So on the front, in this case, chard is known to be frost tolerant, and I've experienced that myself. It can grow in the cold for some duration, and then it gives the maturity range. But that's a flag. Well, that's a hardy cool season crop that you can get going early in the spring and late in the summer for the fall. Notice on the right that the recommendation to sow outside. A lot of the cool season crops are appropriate for starting outside better than starting them inside. That's important to know. It's not always the case, but the seed packet is helpful in that it says, hey, you can start this inside, but we recommend that you sow directly to your garden outside, in this case, 2 to 4 weeks before the average last frost date. And then it gives other important things like soil temperature and air temperature to look for before you put the seeds down. And then it gives, just to finish it, a sowing date for the fall. A couple other things on this chart, sort of climate hardiness zone of 7A, that's where we are. And the average last frost date, and I got this information from Virginia Tech Extension Service, is April 18th. So you use that when you're planning, seed starting or outdoor sowing of seeds in relation to the seed pack. And then in the resources list, I've got a Virginia Tech published detailed planning dates guide that's very helpful. Okay. This is a map of the climate of Virginia hardiness zones of like, what do we mean when we talk about 7A versus 6? And you'll see this for not just vegetables, but all plants. You should be aware of where it's appropriate to grow. I think generally speaking, but not always, when you're buying something from a local good quality garden center, it will be appropriate to grow in this region. And then it's a question of, whether it needs full sun or shade or what type of soil and so forth. But we're in 7A, so I think all but a tiny bit of Fairfax County is in that zone. And there in the 7A detail about last spring frost, it gives you the range, based on prior year's experience, and then they come up with an average. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about root crops and vegetables before my colleagues talk in more detail about carrots and beets. So any underground part of a plant that we eat, that's a root crop. I've got a nice picture of turnips that I got from a seed company, in this case, Renee's Garden. Beautiful harvest there, nice and clean. It's also desirable to, sometimes people will grow turnips, just for the leafy greens on top, which can be quite good in different recipes. So that's a note. Well, in most cases, you just eat the root, what's grown underground, but some people like to harvest or many people, I shouldn't say some, the greens on top. So root crops can be tap roots, the carrots, turnips, beets, tuberous roots like potatoes. Rhizomes is an example, ginger, bulbs, onions, and tubers like yams. So I won't go into all those different types. It's just to say we're talking about a range of crops with very different characteristics. And as I said here, not all are true roots, like an onion is a bulb. It does grow underground though, so it's considered a root crop and does have roots down below the actual fruit or vegetable. As I mentioned earlier, it's generally, in most cases, recommended to direct sow outside, but based on the seed packet and your own experience. And then many of the root crops, here I'll say taproot type crops, just to narrow it a bit, have similar, what we call culture requirements. The soil, the amount of sun, which is generally full sun, and thinning is important with root crops. Typically in the seeding, you'll plant a lot more seeds than you're gonna leave mature, and then it's important to get them thinned out and spaced properly so that they have the roots have enough space to expand. But they can be fairly close, like carrots, closer than turnips. I mentioned succession planting. You can do waves of planting every 2 to 3 weeks with carrots, being mindful of when you're going to hit the hot weather, so that you give it enough time to get going so it can survive. And that applies maybe less so in the fall. I note fall sowing. Again, I've mentioned that before, that's a great time to plant cool season, to grow cool season crops, but the seed date would be in the late summer, which kind of, you feel like, oh, it's too hot to plant these, but the timing's important. Okay, next slide. And then I've got a long list of examples. So here are some good resources. I happened to come across a good article from the Penn State Extension on cool season versus warm season. It was quite good. And then, of course, it had links to planting dates and more detailed information. I use the Rodale's Encyclopedia of Organic Gardening myself. It's quite good if you're interested in organics. Got quite a bit on vegetable growing and specific vegetables. And then, as I mentioned, I've got the Virginia home garden for vegetable planting guide from the Virginia Cooperative Extension, which provides a lot of detail on different categories of cool season and warm season. The thing to emphasize here is that we're referring to .edu type sites or extension service where there's many outstanding extension service programs that have terrific objective science-based information on many topics, including vegetable gardening. Okay, so I guess time